Welcome back to the Word of Mouth Podcast, the podcast that covers the business, news, and trends in the dental industry. Today we have a very special episode. We've been talking about it long enough that we finally decided to write the book on it. So today I've got Troy with me here to announce the launching of our book, The Inside Out Practice. Welcome to the podcast, Troy.
It's great to finally be on.
Yeah, super excited. We've talked a little bit about adding you as a third host. So moving forward, Troy will be a regular part of the show.
I'm looking forward to being part of it.
So let's talk about the Inside Out Practice.
Great. It's a concept that we've talked a lot about, that there's those different layers in the practice. And the more we thought about it and the more we tried to explain it to different dentists and different practitioners and office managers, the more we decided that a good approach would be to write a book about it, using kind of a fable to explain the concept.
Yeah, the point that really came up, and we've talked about it in a lot of our episodes so far, is the kind of squeeze that's happening in the dental industry. It's a different viewpoint that we have, that we take with our clients and with marketing for dentists in general. And we wanted to outline that in a way that's digestible for dentists so that they can understand and apply these principles in their practice.
For sure. I mean, it's what they're feeling. You know, as we've talked with hundreds of dentists, they all are expressing the same pressure that costs continue to, squeeze from the bottom, and at the same time, fees and particularly reimbursements just aren't keeping pace. So what that's doing is really squeezing the margins, squeezing the take-home pay that's available for private practice owners, and as they've looked for ways to respond to that, that's what really has reinforced or has brought to bear the idea that they need to look at things differently than they have historically, or at least over the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah, the book starts with talking about the boiling frog analogy. And as most people know, the boiling frog, you put a frog in boiling water. As the water starts to heat up, the frog doesn't jump out if it's heating slow enough, and eventually it's too late. The water's boiling and the frog is dying in the water. And so we start out with that analogy because that's sort of what's happened in the dental industry.
For sure. And if we look at it just from the marketing perspective, if we take that filter, what's really happened is that things worked well enough, especially with the introduction of Google and that online marketing platform. It worked well enough that people got complacent. A lot of practices were growing, and it became easy. So there just was less attention paid to some of the other areas of the practice. Dentist practices aren't different than other businesses. They have some unique characteristics, but at the end of the day, they're still a small business. And what we have realized and what we've experienced is that some of those business practices that are common in other industries, there's just not the same awareness. There hasn't been the same awareness anyway in some of these small practices of what those key business considerations are.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that dentists are part of the healthcare industry. The healthcare industry as a whole is big business. Dentists are kind of siloed in this unique way where they have their own separate insurance. They all, or a lot of them, operate as like kind of an independent business where 75% of doctors operate in a big hospital. 75% of dentists are independent practice. And so rather than looking at their marketing like maybe a hospital would, they should be looking at their marketing more like a small business owner.
Yeah, and particularly a local business.
Yeah.
They are not an e-commerce. They are not a business that is going to have wide reach in terms of the clientele that they draw in. And so, particularly as DSOs and some of these other pressures have come to bear, the opportunity is to take that small business approach, that brick and mortar marketing approach, and leverage the advantages that come with it, while recognizing the risks of the digital first approach, or oftentimes digital only approach that we're seeing in a lot of practices, where they associate marketing with Google rankings or Google ads or Facebook ads. And there's just limitations on how far that can take you. And that's the pressure that a lot of the practices are feeling right now.
And we felt that in our own set of clinics. We operated clinics across 8 different states, and we tried to compete in the digital first marketing approach and found that a lot of the things that we were doing weren't effective, and the things that no one was telling us to do were the things that were actually working for our clinics.
And yeah, it's a great point. And our history is is summarized in the book as why where this paradigm came from, where this framework came from. And not only did we try it, it was what people told us to try. And when we were struggling, the answer was always maybe adjust a few keywords or change your approach slightly in terms of the digital focus. But the answer was also always spend more.
Yeah.
That was more of the same was the feedback that we got from the marketing agencies we were working with, to the point that we were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in marketing every month, and we weren't getting the results that we needed. And yet the answer was always just tweak a little around the edges and spend more. And after we recognized the failure of that model, we started looking at these other opportunities, like you mentioned, and realized that there are just other elements that need to be taken into account.
Yeah. The book highlights a lot of the kind of internal systems where there might be leaky buckets. And that's what we call our expensive education, where we were spending a ton on marketing, and then we audited our call center and some of the clinic's best practices, and patients weren't converting, not because we didn't have enough throughput, but simply because we didn't have the systems in place to convert those patients and have them come back.
For sure. And so when we say inside out, that's what we really learned is, if you try to minimize the loss or the leaks inside the practice, and at the same time really try to amplify the opportunities that you have via referral or reactivation within the framework of within the walls of the clinic, those that you sort of own, there's a lot of revenue that you can generate just from that alone. But it also allows you not only to be more efficient on whatever spend you are doing on the marketing side or effort you're doing on the marketing side, but it gives you better information. You're going to be more effective in terms of the targeting. So there's just so much value by refining those internal systems and internal strategies. That's why we really highlight that as in the book, is kind of the first place to really start is by looking internally at where those opportunities lie.
Yeah, let's go through the book, maybe a little bit high level overview. We kind of talk about it. We have a tooth with a geode on the front because it really is inside out. The kind of valuable stuff starts inside and works out. We have kind of a few layers. Let's maybe walk through those.
Yeah, and so we really talk about 3 layers in this inside-out framework, and really a fourth if you start with differentiation. So let's start with that first layer or pre-layer, which is really defining who you are, and who you are the best fit for. One of the problems with the digital marketplace is that it really encouraged copycatting. And so what you end up with is most dental websites, most online presences are really indistinguishable. I don't know, if that's the right way to frame that or not, but it doesn't encourage. Google has not encouraged you to be different and to really highlight what is different about your practice.
Yeah, and we see with a lot of people, a lot of dental practices, that they focus on cheaper keywords because they're higher volume, like general dentistry or emergency dentistry. But those are also the lowest value patients on an ongoing basis, where I think a lot of people are afraid to target higher value cases like full mouth restorations or implants because the spend is so expensive. And what we found is that the real key is to make that marketing component complementary to what's happening on top of the dental practice. And it starts with identifying who are the ideal patients that you want to see. What's your ideal case? What's the kind of ideal patient flow through your practice?
Yeah, and there's a nuance to it that a lot of people miss. That there's a concern that dentists and all small business owners face, that they just want to make sure they're getting more calls. And so a lot of that digital strategy, the promise is, hey, all you need to do is pay for ads and you'll get phone calls. And there's some level of truth to that. But at the same time, if you're getting calls from people who are just all price sensitive, if it's all about insurance coverage and doing the minimum amount of work, if they're people that are just going to be poor patients, poor quality patients over the long term, getting more of those isn't a solution. In fact, oftentimes it's just exacerbating the underlying problem of profitability and practice sustainability. So the promise of digital marketing oftentimes is it's a mirage. It looks great from a distance, but when you get up and realize, oh, this is the kind of patients or the kind of calls that we're getting, the people that don't show up for their appointments, all of that, you've just created a bigger problem. You haven't solved it. And so that's what some of that identification of, who are we? What is our kind of core value? What is the essence of our practice, and who matches up with that? Who's the right fit?
Yeah, depending on patient quality, you could be less busy and make more money, or more busy and make less money. And that's kind of the false dichotomy that's created by ads, where you feel like you're getting more people, so you should be making more money, but that's not always the case.
Yeah, and not to get too far into that, because we'll talk a little bit more about the digital element as a separate layer, but it really, there is a liberation that we found with our clients when they're really able to say, this is who we are. And it doesn't mean that you dump all of your client base or anything like that, or your patient base or anything like that, but just getting that clarity and starting to ask the questions of, who is it that we're the best fit for, and where are they? How do we target them? It just results in the right questions, or more satisfying questions, and consequently, better answers and better focus. But again, that's not an exercise that we found a lot of practices do, is really differentiate themselves. We see a lot of sort of marketing slogans that have been pitched. We're family friendly, and we're high quality dentistry. A lot of things that are very generic, but they're the type of things that you could take and apply to every single dental practice. The 50 dental practices within 10 miles of you, and it would be equally true of, or at least all of them would represent it as being equally true of them. So it's not about, those kind of slogans. It's really, getting a better sense of who you are and who's the right fit.
Yeah. And as we move into that kind of first or second layer, depending on how you look at it, of the internal systems, I just want to point out that this identity, a lot of people, I think, view it as important for the practice owner or the dentist. But this is something that all of the staff, the front desk, the office manager, the hygienist, the assistants, everyone, if they can get on board, it does create and amplify the next layer, which is the internal layer. It's not just for those kind of running the practice. It's the whole team needs to get on board, and it is liberating. Once you kind of have a vision, people like to be part of a movement. Yeah. And so the whole staff can get excited and move forward with growing the practice.
And so moving from that kind of first layer of that differentiation or identity into the second layer, like you're talking about, it's important to recognize that it's not just about operational efficiency. It really is about practice effectiveness. And that does take the form of maybe some automations or a focus on making sure that you're answering a higher percentage of phone calls or whatever it might be. There may be some of those tactical or efficiency type things for sure. And you want to identify those and reduce those leaks. But there's also the effectiveness where each patient interaction is intended to advance the probability that they will come back, that they will accept treatment recommendations, that they'll refer. All of that happens as a consequence of how they feel about the practice. So to your point, 100%, it's not something that is to be on a little plaque on the wall of the dentist, as a little rah-rah. The more that identity, the more that differentiation permeates the interactions and just kind of the culture of the practice, it is a big revenue and profitability driver.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just actually working on a report last night, and I found out that only 41% of new patients come back for a second visit. If they come back for a second visit, it's around 65% that come back for a third visit. As soon as you get to that third visit, it's 70, 80, 90% are returning, and fourth visit and onwards, it's 90 to 95% are coming back. And so the more you can cultivate kind of that retention mindset for your patients and create an experience where it is enjoyable to come back and be a part of your practice, the better off your patient retention is. And we all know a retained patient is 5 times cheaper than a new patient. So from that perspective, it's huge. But then on the flip side, someone's having a great experience. They've been coming to you for 10 years or 5 years or 2 years even. They're so much more likely to give you a referral at that point than trying to just swing for the fences on referrals with a first-time patient.
Right. And that low return rate, that really speaks to the commoditization of dentistry. And this is really both on the DSO and on Google. What they've done is they've really reduced the practice of dentistry to a transaction. And for DSOs, where volume and scale is really the key of the business model, that's not the worst thing in the world. For the private practice, there's this great opportunity to recognize that it is a relationship that you're selling. It is not dental services, right? They can get dental services everywhere. But if you can create a situation where they feel like they have a relationship with you, now what happens? Retention becomes, axiomatic. It's a no-brainer because they're not coming to get a cleaning. They're coming to continue this relationship they have. Treatment acceptance. Of course, that's going to go up with somebody with whom they have a trusted relationship. Of course, that's going to happen. And in terms of the referral, how much more likely is it to refer someone who, hey, I love their practice, they treat us well, I know them, I have a relationship with these people, versus, hey, they have cheap cleanings. It changes everything. And so that's why we view it as such an important opportunity and such a missed opportunity for those that aren't focused on it.
Absolutely. I just wanted to also point out that with the internal, anyone who's in the kind of treatment plan acceptance and financing part of dentistry will just absolutely appreciate the relationship building, because it changes the conversation at that point where a lot of people say, that's too expensive, I'll defer treatment. If you have the trust built with the dentist where they feel like this person is being honest with me, they're only prescribing what I need and what will be best for me, they're being clear in how they're communicating those things to me. They get to the financing thing and it's not, the number isn't the question, it's how do I make this work that's a question. And then whether it's financing it over time or splitting payments, however it works, the conversation is completely different. So it's not just from a clinical side that treatment acceptance goes up, but across the whole practice, everyone appreciates and benefits from developing these kinds of relationships with patients.
And so on the inside layer, of course, a lot of that might feel like platitudes. Everyone would say, "Oh, of course, you need to have a friendly practice and everything." The point that we like to emphasize is, one, the mechanics, so the discipline and the efficiency pieces, they provide the framework that allows you to then be more consistent in implementing some of those effectiveness things. So it is something like anything where it requires intentionality. I mean, it has to be something that is a priority, not a nice to have, but really viewed as a need to have. It's like if there's a piece of equipment that you don't have that you need, you don't just say, well, whatever. It is an essential. You have to solve how to get it in order to continue to practice, that element of dentistry. It needs to be that. It needs to be highlighted with that type of necessity if you're really wanting to grow a practice. Because those that get it right, getting more patients it really becomes a non-issue. They can be selective of the type of patients they want and the types of treatments they're going to focus on or whatever. That's the result. So it really is important. Now the next layer up is, and it becomes there's a synergy when you're really focused on that community layer.
Yeah.
And so that's why that's the next layer is go from identity or differentiation to those inside considerations, and then really looking at how do you make those connections with the community.
Yeah, there's countless opportunities in any community to network with other business owners, to provide mouth guards for a school sports team, to go out and do education events for the local community. And those are the things that continue to cement that relationship-driven patient, where the patient is coming to you and then they hear, hey, he sponsors my kid's high school, or they're teaching this class, I'm going to go attend. And it just continues to compound that trust that is developed in clinic first, and then attract more patients, where now you're getting referral word going out, and then you're kind of doing outbound coming in terms of some of these community and local engagement events.
Yes, and an important thing to recognize is that the term community, it's not the same as neighborhood. Neighborhood tends to be geographically bounded. Community isn't actually geographically bounded. It really means connection. And so what we see with a lot of practices is they're trying to do that kind of community outreach, and they're doing sponsoring a lot of teams or trying to work with schools or whatever it might be, but there isn't really a cohesive message as to why they're attempting to connect with whomever they're trying to connect with. And so this comes back to that identity question. Who is the right fit? Now, it really may be that neighborhood focus where it is just geographically, we take care of ours. And that's a powerful message. And it's an important message if that's the approach that a practice is going to take, to make that super clear. To make you, and the thing, the math that's important is you don't need 50,000 patients. A practice can't handle that many. So you need to really be cognizant of what is the patient count that you're needing for the practice that you're wanting. And oftentimes it's a lot, the community that can produce it is a lot smaller than it initially feels like.
Yeah, I mean, running some of these reports for these dental practices, just looking at a geographic boundary of 10 or 15 minutes, it's astounding the amount of dental work that is produced in these areas. So capturing just your share of that big pie is more than enough for a lot of these practices. It's just being efficient about how you're tackling those things. And so depending on, again, going all the way back to the identity, but then looking at the internal systems as well, what is kind of the goal for the practice? We have one client that we work with that their practice does a lot of sleep disorder treatment. And so his community, this dentist community, involves a lot of pediatricians and getting involvement with them to help them recognize the signs and symptoms in their patients. And ENTs on the other side, where they're already treating a lot of these airway issues and creating that community that way. It may not be necessarily so much school sponsors that works for the community outreach. So it really does everything builds. That's, again, why it's the inside out practice. It builds from the inside and that internal identity going outwards.
And so there may be certain treatment types or focuses that you have that would drive some of the decision of what your community looks like. It may also just be interests and the places where you're already connected with a broader community. If you're engaged in, say, the mountain bike community or something like that, that's leverageable, and it can expand the radius relating to that particular affinity group is the term that's often used in marketing. But pay attention to where you're already connected and recognize that you do have a community. All practices have a community, not only the dentists, but the staff, associate dentists as well. They have connections that can be leveraged if they're done so intentionally, not in a utilitarian way. We're not talking about being disingenuous, but instead making the identity of the practice match what your identity is and the connections that you already have. That's your community. And there's always going to be opportunities to be better at tying in and creating those relationships in your community, whatever that is, or communities, I should say. It doesn't mean that there's only one, but just being aware of how you can connect with people and develop and utilize the relationships that are naturally going to be a part of who you are and where your focus is.
Yeah, and I think that this is a great segue into expanding into the digital layer, because once you develop your ideal community, let's say you're into mountain biking and that's kind of those are your people and they're the patients that you're going to be able to connect with in office. When you run ads, make sure that's a part of it. On the landing page, have a part of your about me be that you're into mountain biking, and you'll start to create these based on your internal identity, the systems that you're creating in practice, and the communities that you're trying to target. You can form much more effective digital campaigns, and it may be Google Ads, which is kind of standard practice, but it may be somewhere else. It may be Facebook groups. It may be some
TikTok
of these other things.
Whatever.
Yeah, TikTok.
Who knows?
Reddit, I know, is super popular for ads for certain industries as well. And so there are just different opportunities as long as you understand all of those downstream layers. The digital layer can be super effective. It's just when you start there with kind of a generic, we're a great dentist, that's where it fails.
Yes, we say it. We like it to be the amplifier, not the initiator. And on the flip side of the coin, you brought up a lot of great examples of how to do it right. On the flip side, what we see so many practices doing, because it's what marketing agencies recommend, because it's what's easiest and most profitable for the marketing agency, is a lot of promotion heavy advertising. So the $49 or $79 or $99 cleaning, that is the lead, or that is the approach that the majority of practices that we see are utilizing. And you have to just take a step back and say, what is the patient profile for whom that approach is going to work?
Yeah, I actually have a great example. My wife's aunt is one of those patients, and we talked to her a little bit about what we're doing, and she said, yeah, I'm definitely not the ideal patient because I've been to 6 different dentists for my last 6 cleanings. I just find who has a cheap deal and go there next. And so she is part of that 59% statistic that's skedaddling after visit 1.
And skedaddling is a great word. But that is what you have to be mindful of, because what has changed, and we saw big changes in 2025, and it's just going to continue to increase, is more personalized search results, where local search, if I'm searching dentists near me, if I move into an area and I'm looking for a new dentist, Google knows a lot about me. They know about my search patterns. They know about my purchasing patterns. And if I'm the type of digital user that is always looking for those inexpensive options, Google's going to feed that to me. That's who those practices are who they're going to show to me. Conversely, if I'm someone that's always looking for, really high authority and I do research and I'm looking for quality, not cheapest price, Google recognizes that, and more they're going to send me search results that align with my personality, my persona. So when you think about that and you're running ads, if your approach is we're cheap, you will get more of the looking for cheap patients. That's who you're going to get. That's the flow you're going to get. And we hear from so many dentists, boy, I'm getting calls, but it's just the patient quality is low. They're just wanting cheap and everything else. Yeah, if that's who you're getting, whatever you're doing from a marketing perspective will only produce more of that. You will never win
by spending more on that same marketing approach.
Exactly. More of bad is more bad. It does not somehow convert to good. And I think that's the myth or the great lie. And we bought into this with our practices, with our clinics, that there's some threshold that if I can just get over this threshold of volume, now it's all, milk and honey. And the reality is that is the great lie of digital first marketing.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. That threshold is met. That threshold exists, but it's for Fortune 500 corporations.
The big DSOs.
Yeah. Big DSOs, Fortune 500 corporations, big hospital groups. It's not for a local business. Right. You can't do the throughput as a dentist to make those kind of numbers work for your practice. And so you do just need to, ultimately, dentists have kind of three choices right now moving forward into kind of the new age of digital marketing and marketing for dentistry. They can either stick with what they're doing, kind of try and ride it out, try and hit that mythical threshold. They can sell to a DSO, and that certainly takes that burden off of them, the marketing burden, and they can kind of get that threshold through selling to a DSO, or change the approach, work from the inside out, go back to what made dentists great, what made being an independent dentist so appealing, and what made them fixtures in their community for the last 200 years. Going back to the things that make a practice grow.
That probably sounds a little doom and gloom, but the reality is we are super bullish. We're super positive about the outlook for private dental practices. That is a great model because of the advantages that it has to tie into the community and really focus on building that identity in a unique way. Where DSOs, that it just doesn't work that way because they're starting with an employee model, and so we see that the outlook is really optimistic for dental practices that focus on building these different layers of their practice.
Yeah. So let's finish up talking about the book.
So it was a fun book to put together that we all worked on. It's done in a fable format. So, Patrick Lencioni and the Arbinger Institute. The Goal, Who Moved My Cheese, kind of out of that vein. And the idea is to focus really primarily on that internal layer. And we expect that we'll write some additional books that focus a little bit more on the other layers. But the idea was to really help dentists understand the funnel idea, the idea of funnel, even though that is way too overused, the concept. It's still an important one to recognize that there are those different points where there is leaks. And the more that you're able to move down to a retained patient, but also one that's really an evangelist for you, one that really enjoys what you bring to the dental practice and their dental care.
Yeah, we cite it all the time, but we have that dentist who has that patient that has become an evangelist, and they can trace 23 individual patients back to this single patient. And so
over the course of just a few months.
Yeah. And those patients are now starting to refer people. And so it snowballs once you can kind of get some of these ideal patients in who are referring more of the ideal patients. And then, like you said earlier in the podcast, the new patient conundrum just kind of solves itself.
It does, and if for in no other way, if it provides clarity of how to go and find those new patients. And so that's really the focus of the book, is to walk through a dentist's kind of his increasing understanding of the power that comes from trying to solve some of those internal problems that he feels but hasn't really put his finger on. And so that's the purpose of the funnel, of the fable, is to hopefully make it a little bit more understandable and a little bit more practical why that internal layer is so powerful.
Yeah, it was a blast putting it together. We're really proud of the story and the way it does tie everything together. And we look forward to writing more of these kinds of books that help dentists continue to build out the inside-out practice.
And really to understand that it is a business, but that's a good thing. It's an exciting thing when you really focus on the best business practices. And private practices, again, part of why we're so optimistic is those best business practices where in other industries they obviously improve the business, but they don't have the characteristics that a dental practice does, where the person is coming in to see you ideally multiple times during the year. It's a really heavily trust-based industry. There's just so many great things about it that when you get the business principles right, it's an atypically large multiplier for the private dental practice.
Absolutely. So if people want a copy of the Inside Out Practice, the link will be in the description. You can click it through there, get your free copy. We'll ship it out to you. We may even sign it. Who knows? We're not big authors yet, but this is going to be the one. So probably want to hold on to that autograph. As far as the podcast goes, it's been a blast having you on. It's been a blast writing the book. It's been a blast talking about it. We love talking about dentistry, the business, all of the things, the trends, and the different news that's coming out about how dentists, private practice dentists, can own better businesses. And that's a good thing, like you mentioned. So if that's something that's interesting to you, we are here on YouTube, or we also stream the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. So please subscribe, connect with us in the comments. We love connecting with our dentist friends, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.